fashion, things to wear, possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. Fangs and Infernos. Here is a little food for thought. Here is something worth checking out. Now, as of course you guys all know, myself and the devil love our directorial episodes. We look forward to them every time we get to do them, and you guys have been super supportive and down for the cause. We've talked about Wes, we've talked about Joel, we've talked about John, and we've talked about Clive, and a bunch in between. But the thing that makes this so much fun is this is right up the vampire's alley, but this is the devil's entire alley. Devil, my friend, the SOSKA sisters.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about some bloody movies, bloody good time, bloody twins. We're going to talk about hot chicks. We're going to talk about different things. We're going to talk about wrestlers. There's going to be some wrestling in here. Some wrestling. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. We're going to talk about bone saws and Ginger Snaps Catherine, and we're going to talk about all kinds of good stuff with the SOSKA sisters. Yes, it's going to be they are a newer director-ish compared to some of the people that we have done before, and their filmography is a lot smaller. So this episode is going to be a lot smaller, a lot quicker, a lot less. But that doesn't mean it's less less worthy to talk about, you know what I mean? They're just beginning, and I believe that there's still many more horrific things for them to show us and stuff like that. So, and then like I said, I mean, even though we haven't really gone into that, and I know we usually talk about movies and stuff like that and things they directed, but since it technically wasn't a movie or thing they directed, I was like, let's just talk about it right now. They had a show called Elevator that was on for a couple seasons, man. And all the Fangs and Infernos, if you didn't know what it was basically like Fear Factor, mixed in with escape rooms and haunted houses, but with the SOSKA sisters, as their hosts and stuff like that. And that was my ultimate goal, was I wanted to go and be on that show just so I can meet the SOSKA sisters. I don't even care what they did to me. I don't like snakes and I don't like spiders, but on those shows, I always like, because they tell you when you do these shows, you're always like with Fear Factor and all this kind of stuff like that. What are you fearful? And I'm like, I would just be like balloons, big titty women, it's just stuff like that. Be like, because I mean, like I said, I mean, it's granted, most people are afraid of heights. Most people are afraid of snakes and spiders and even dogs or something like that. But I mean, that's the crazy thing about it. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are afraid of like balloons or clowns or any of that kind of stuff. So I was like, man, I would just start saying that. But then my luck, I'll get on an episode where it's like, okay, now you gotta stay in a coffin and have like 10,000 tarantulas jump on you, or it'll be in the the I always say like the one episode of Jackass when they were pranking Bam Margera and they put him in that cage with that snake.
Oh, the snakes, yeah.
And he got, but except that the only difference would be I wouldn't be as silky and smooth as Bam. He got out of that freaking thing like a fucking ninja.
The way he slid through that tiny little
grate, yeah. I was like, no, I would have been dead because I was in that same boat as him, and I would be like, yeah, because I'm definitely afraid of snakes, and that was a big fucking snake. My thing is I don't have no ninja skills. I would have just been dead.
No, absolutely, my friend, and for sure. And definitely when it comes to that kind of stuff is like Mrs. Vamp, she does not fuck with with like spiders. So like if she drew the card of like despite the fact that she may be comfortable in a coffin, but they fill that thing up with tarantulas, she's gonna have a really bad time.
Yeah, I'll be like, yeah, I'm out, I'm out. Yeah, but like I said, when it came to that, I always liked that show. I thought it was really, really cool. I
Yeah,
love the production value of it and stuff like that. It was just cool. And it's like I said, it was like, you just saw like the twisted mind of the Soska sisters, basically like wreaking havoc and, making people walk through, buildings with no lights on and stuff like that, and people jumping up and scaring them, and they're just laughing about it the whole entire time. But like I said, I mean, the main thing was I was always jealous of every person who was on that show because I was like, they at least got to hang out and meet the Soska sisters. Damn them.
absolutely. For sure. So let's jump into it a little bit, my friend, because of course, the Soska sisters' whole filmography starts off with, frankly, one of my favorite titles just in film. Like, look, we're if the Fangs and Infernos and RIPs haven't figured it out yet, you and I are Soska sisters people. But we're film people, we're movie guys. This is one of my favorite titles in film, regardless. Even if it wasn't relevant to this episode, even if it wasn't relevant or a movie that I even liked, dude, Dead Hooker in a Trunk. Is there any kind of fun or cooler name in film than something that kind of is so direct? Like, you can take a legendary movie like Silence of the Lambs and you're not gonna know from that title what the movie's about because the movie Silence of the Lambs has absolutely stylistically nothing to do with the title. But you take a movie like we're about to get into and Dead Hooker in a Trunk, that title is as accurate to the plot as you're gonna get, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I love it. You open up with their first movie, Dead Hooker in the Trunk, and you get exactly what you bargained for. You get a dead hooker in a trunk. I mean, there's no pulling any punches. I love the stylistic of them opening the trunk. It's very Quentin Tarantino esque. With because Quentin Tarantino, and people are out there who are fans of Quentin Tarantino. He's a big, huge open up the trunk kind of guy. Him and Robert Rodriguez, a lot of like trunk scenes and stuff like that. So I always love it. But like I said, yeah, when it comes to this movie, and like I said, I mean, you open it up. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably controversial, but not completely. But if some people, when they talk about this movie, they're like, it's just so this and that. Like, you got to realize, man, it was basically made for almost pretty much nothing. It was like 15 grand or something like that, and most of that was going to prosthetics and makeup and
The
and
movie
shit like
was
that.
made for like $1.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, I mean, granted, but like I said, but Terrifier and the stuff we talk about that, these low budget, it's
That's what's
it,
so
it is
great.
it is very low budget, and you can tell it's low budget, but it's not as low budget as you would look. For as much money as they spent, this movie looks really good.
It
I mean,
really
like film wise and stuff like that. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't look like a completely homemade camera and stuff like that. So I always do that. And like I said, I mean, to me, I mean, as we go on with the Soska sisters and we do our top five and stuff like that, we're gonna put rank with all this stuff like that. And it's like to me, I'm already gonna say now because it's fair. I would love to put this one as number one just because for two reasons. One, because the title and the beginning. Plus, this one we get to see a lot of sin and skin of the Soska sisters. You know what I mean? You get to see bra and panties, and it's like yeah, and all the other movies that they've made, you get a little bit of love, except for the one that they did they did have on their IMDb, but you can't really find it anywhere, and it's almost impossible to find. Apparently, it's about like a dominatrix S&M. So apparently that one's gonna have a lot more sin skins. But yeah, I mean what's not to love about this movie? But like I said, I mean it's just kooky stupidness. I mean, I love the fact that like the one girl, she's got her arm almost taken off throughout the whole entire time. And then she's like standing outside the road, and the freaking truck driver just takes the freaking arm completely right off. It's just
dude,
like,
it's so. what the fuck is the movie? Oh shit. It's so Hot Tub Time Machine.
Yeah, like
Like
you're
the
like
way that the fucking snowplow goes by and just takes the dude's shit away.
it's just so great, and it's just like I said, it's so comical. Like I said, a lot of people look at this. It's because again, a lot of people are gonna when it comes to Dead Hooker in the Trunk, obviously they're gonna be going to either See No Evil or maybe like an American Mary when we get to those ones, and that's gonna be the first movie that they've ever seen from the
Yeah.
Soska sisters, and then all of a sudden you go into this, and people are like, "What the heck's this?" And I'm like, you got to realize this is before they had really any money. Even American Mary is still very
Yeah.
independently filmed and stuff like that. I mean they didn't get that big budget until See No Evil 2. But you know what I mean? It's just like one of those ones where it's like it's fun, you just it's exactly what's up our alley. Stupid, cheeky horror, you know, cheeky comedy and dumb gags and stupid jokes and just like constant, puke and fart jokes throughout most of it and stuff like that. And then it's just
I
like
mean, dude, they're
just
they're
craziness.
attacked by a pimp.
Yeah.
I mean, dude.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Like I said, I love it. I think it's just like I said, for an opening, first time movie and stuff like that. It's definitely up there as one of my favorites from like, when you see and stuff like that with these, with these directors and sometimes, you know what I mean? Because you gotta realize this one, yeah, I mean, sometimes people have their first movie is a big movie or something like that, but a lot of times, even when we do these directorial episodes we don't really include their first movies because a lot of times their first movies are more like student films or like small projects that don't you can't really find anywhere or they're hard to even get, so you basically got to have to do all that kind of stuff to try to find out where it is, so you're just like with
John
this one.
Carpenter is
yeah
actually
with,
a great example of that.
yeah yeah, where this one, it's like, it's their first one and you know, it's relatively, accessible. I mean, for a while it was really hard. It was one of those DVDs that we talked about out there, like Freaked and some of those ones that were really hard to find and super expensive. But then, they got a resurgence of them bringing those back out. So like that. But I mean, it's on streaming services like AMC has it. Tubi, I mean, as we go through most of these movies are all for the Soska sisters are on Tubi, which is great.
Dude, Tubi loves
I
them
mean,
some Soska sisters, man.
one movie is a Tubi original, which we'll get into. But I still love the fact that you can find these kind of independent horror films and stuff like that, and watch these ones, and it's great.
Absolutely, my friend. And honestly, I'll give a little shout out to Tubi when it just comes to independent horror. Tubi deserves some love when it comes to this because, like, their streaming service. Look, we understand that, like, Shudder and other streaming services that are dedicated to horror are going to have a lot of great movies and a lot of accessibility. But for somebody like Tubi, that also does a pretty good job. Like Mrs. Vamp and I regularly watch Tubi that have like great like comedies and sports movies and this, that, and the other thing. Tubi's pretty solid across the board, and I'll die on the hill for that. But their their willingness to have independent horror, lesser known stuff is pretty awesome. Like when I did a Coffin Nails on a previous episode that we put out where I was talking about Out for Blood with Vanessa Angel. So please cons bring her back. You had her, but she had to cancel. Please bring back Vanessa Angel so I can get her to sign my Out for Blood and also my Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys from a previous episode that Devil and I did, not literally, but figuratively. But if all of you Fangs and Infernos who watch that episode will know what I'm referencing. Anyway, Tubi is great for that. And like I said, they love them some Soska sisters. But the other thing I also really like about, Dead Hooker in a Trunk before we, move into the catalog more is the fact that Jen and Sylvia deserve some recognition for understanding a good quality twist, because the idea of like them being so sure that they've got the serial killer locked down to then have it twisted into the fucking like delicate little priest that nobody would ever think to be this sinister guy. I think it's honestly worthy of acknowledging that, you know, in their first movie, for them to understand what comes with a good quality twist, and in my opinion, to execute it very well, I do think that's worth acknowledging, my friend.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, I mean, it's such a good. Like I said, it's such a good movie. Like I said, definitely, when you watch throughout their filmography and stuff like that, if you go, you watch all their newer stuff and you go back and watch this, yes, it definitely, it definitely has those, qualities where it's like, okay, yeah, the acting may not be as great, or this might not be as great, but like I said, I just love it because it's like right to a point, like I said before, with the title straight up, dead hooker in the trunk, you're getting exactly what you're looking for. It's not meant. This movie's not meant to be, Gone in the Wind, or some Oscar winning, Pulitzer Prize, movie that's gonna, the Criterion collection is not gonna be knocking on Dead Hooker in the Trunk. Maybe, when we talk about some of these other movies, there's definitely other movies that I believe that could possibly be on the Criterion and things like that. But Dead Hooker in the Trunk, as much as I love it, and we love that, like I said, that campiness that we talk about all the time with the, with the trauma films or the full
Yeah.
moon films and stuff like that. We love it. I mean, like I said, I mean, and we've said it before a million times. I mean, I always go, you have this, this director that's directed Lord of the Rings, multi-billion-dollar movie, and he's got these shitty ass movies back in the day, Brain Dead and Dead Alive and stuff like that. And you're like, what the hell? Like, even like, we were just talking about it before. We just got done watching Send Help with Sam
Right.
Raimi. You know what I mean? And look at Sam Raimi, doing the Evil Dead and the Evil Dead movies to doing Spider-Man. You know what I mean? You got Robert Rodriguez and stuff like that doing those kind of, the mariachi and stuff like that, doing those films, to all of a sudden doing like Spy Kids and these big, huge, multi-million-dollar films. So it's crazy. You never know. You never know where these people are gonna go. You know what I mean? So I love like seeing these like first time directors and stuff like that when they go to do these horror films and they do it how they want to do it. And that's the one thing that I love about as we're going on with the Soska filmography, it always seems they, just like other people, they always have their touch to it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, now, granted, yes, there are going to be other, when we talk about, there is one movie in their filmography that's kind of out of pocket for them, as far as like what you're expecting to see, as far as like what you get. But like I said, I mean, you gotta, I mean, every filmography does that. Every director does. I mean, look at Kevin
Yep.
Smith. I mean, a lot of people may bitch about Cop Out. I like Cop Out. I think Cop Out's great. But I mean, but look at Red
And
State. You know
and
what I mean?
Vulgar is way outside of his realm.
Yeah, yeah, and then like Red State and stuff like that, where it's like a little bit of that horror film, and even people will talk about it. That we, as directors, we like to pick people who we just want to pick, and I'm a huge freaking, a huge Kevin Smith fan, so we may add him to one of our director specials, and you guys can't say shit about it because he did do Tusk. And I don't care what anybody says, Tusk is definitely a fucking horror film. It is definitely a body horror film. I
I'm
don't care
in
what
your corner.
anybody says.
I'm in your corner, devil. I
You know
got
what I
you,
mean?
my friend.
Yes, yes, it's definitely not your traditional horror film, but it definitely is a Cronenberg type body horror film. I mean, he makes a guy into a fucking tusk, into a walrus. So, I mean, that's about as crazy as you get. So that's what I like about, the Soska sisters and stuff like that, where these film directors aren't afraid to, just to do it at one. And like you said, I mean, it's such a great movie and a great way to start. And then, like I said, with that twist and stuff like that, you can just tell that they're, not only really good writers and good at filming and doing stuff like that, but the Soska, Jen and Sylvia are definitely true movie and horror fans. You know what I mean? You can definitely tell that is, these people that we've talked about, with our John Carpenters and our George Romeros and stuff like that, that people like them inspired them to become what they are. And you can definitely tell that they're students of those kind of games, because even with this first one, I mean, it's still awesome, and it's still a cool ass movie to watch.
Absolutely. And as we get into our second one, give me just a moment, Devil. This is appropriate for what we're doing, my friend.
Oh yeah, yeah. Gotta
Yeah,
give the Fangs and Infernos a little treat.
absolutely. Absolutely, Devil. So, of course, you and I got to go out to Creature Feature recently, and we had a great time. And I'm precursoring it with this, and then following up with a second very cool thing for the Fangs and Infernos to check out. So, again, people are inspired by different things. And we do want to give a shout out to a previous episode of the V&D podcast when it came to a showdown, when it came to women killers, where we were treated incredibly well by the killer of audition. Ehi was really, really awesome. She treated Devil and I like family. She was great. She took photos with us. Her handler was lovely. They even posted us on her official Instagram. So that was very, very cool. So that's a little treat for the Fangs and Infernos, first and foremost. Now, the reason I bring that up is because it honestly bridges into our next topic, which is American Mary. Now, again, before Devil and I get into the breakdown, so Devil and I had this recent revelation. Devil actually gets the credit for this because it was his idea and I think it was great. So he and I have been very blessed or cursed, depending on how you want to look at the way that a vampire and devil should be treated, is that when it comes
Be
to
cursed.
meeting the people that we meet and getting to interview certain people, we like to do we like to get little mementos of those interviews. Of course, they're always going to be posted for you guys. Devil and I are in plans to extend some special opportunities, some special things to you guys through another platform that we're still crossing the I's and dotting the T's, as the old backwards saying goes, that we're still figuring that out. But one of the things that Devil had thought of that I thought was absolutely great is when we have certain opportunities, is that we would get things signed to the show, to us, as opposed to just individually. So, something might be signed to Devil. Awesome. Something might be signed to your beloved vampire. Hey, I love it. We love to extend our individual things, our individual collections. But every now and then, the ability to have something very cool signed to us as a team, because Devil and I are brothers, we're a team, and we love what we do. Those opportunities don't always come across as easily as you might think, and sometimes they're very, very cool. So some opportunities were very easy. Like Devil and I were fortunate recently at a previous con last year to go up and meet the original like writer and illustrator of 30 Days of Night, the original graphic novels. And Devil, for anybody who's not familiar with, he does all of our artwork and he also does our editing. And he made us a poster of the three 30 Days of Night uh, graphic novel covers that they signed to Vampire and Devil. That was a very, very cool thing. It's actually hanging right now in my office in, you know, to quote one of my absolute favorite artists, the layer of vampire. It's hanging on my wall. But the first opportunity that we had was the SOSKA sisters. We reached out to them and they were down for the cause. So they were actually offering up real bone saws in reference to right now, American Mary. And they actually sent Devil and I an actual American Mary bone saw signed to us, to Vampire and Devil. That is a very, very cool thing and something that Devil and I definitely it didn't go unappreciated because not only did they send us that, let me see if can I reach it? Oh, there it is. They sent us also a cool little card. Like all bullshit aside, Fangs and Infernos, like Jen and Sylvie are genuinely cool people. And yes, Devil and I are fans, but we're also professionals and we understand what they go through, what they do, and also the fandom that comes with the process. But we reached out to them. They were down for the cause. They were super cool about it. And like I said, they sent us an American Mary Bonesaw signed to Vampire and Devil. And it's incredibly important to let them know on their episode that we really, really appreciate them for that. And that was really, really cool because they were offering it out to fans and other people. But for them to be really, really cool about the fact that they're like, hey, we do this show, we appreciate your work, and we'd really like it signed to us personally with our lifestyles and the hundreds of years that we've been around. We would really like that documented because we love your guys' work. That's some pretty cool stuff there, my friend. So, Devil, what do you say we get into American Mary? Definitely influenced by Audition, but this is all about, of course, the Soska sisters. American Mary, my friend.
Oh yeah, this is like, like I said, when it comes to the Soskas, this is pretty much like the one that if anybody is familiar with their work, this is the film that everybody pretty much knows. You know what I mean? It's still to this day, people are still dressing up, cosplaying in the American Mary outfits and stuff like that all the time. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those cool movies that all these years later it's still awesome. It's just it's a cool movie because it's if you for people who have seen the film, it's basically like a sort of a fucked up love letter to everybody in the horror community or
Yeah,
tattooing community and the body modding and stuff like that, to the point where you know other than a few of the people who were actors, and some of that stuff was prosthetics and stuff like that, a lot of the people who were body modified in this movie were actually part of the body modifying community and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. They just kind of added that aspect to it. You know what I mean? And even her in the very beginning, she was kind of like, you know, I don't know about this, but then realized like, oh shit, yeah, this is kind of a cool community. And I just love the fact that, yeah, she just, you see her Mary in the very beginning, she's just like, kind of timid and stuff like that to when you see her at the end of the movie, she's just doing all kinds of crazy ass shit. I just like I said, it's just a cool movie. And like I said, being a huge fan of Ginger Snaps and being a huge fan of Catherine, I've always loved her. Loved her in that movie, and I love her in this movie where I just love that. And it's like, probably between her and the actress that plays the Betty Boop character, I think she
yeah,
was amazing. I love it. It's
amazing.
such a weird and kooky character where, like I said, but it's one of those things that's true, and even in this movie where the one girl was talking about, wanting to be a Barbie doll and like, getting her nipples taken completely off and having her, her down parts, sewed up and stuff like that so it looks like a doll and stuff like that, which is, there have been many documented, cases of people doing that kind of stuff and stuff like that, where maybe people are trying. I mean, there was a guy that spent millions of dollars to look like a Ken doll and stuff like that, where, I mean, so
Yep.
it's like, you know, I've got the fortunate, I was able to meet and talk to a couple of times of, Enigma or Lizard Man, as everybody always called him. You know what I mean? Just all the cool
Mhm.
stuff that, with all the body modifications that he's done and stuff like that. He was with
Me
Jim Rose
too.
Freak Circus and stuff like that. He's gone around to some of these tattooing conventions and stuff like that. I think it's cool. I mean, like I said, it's not everybody's, bag. And it's not like, there are people that go a little bit extreme. Like, I watched this guy, I can't remember his name right now on there, but the guy's got like tattoos all on his chest that he keeps on doing over and over and over again. He's done like 9 million passes and he's got like horns in his nose and stuff like that. But it's like he's talking about like, he's probably the most tattooed person in the world. And you'd be like, what? But you got to realize he's done his tattoos over and over and, modified it again and darkened it and then added extra other colors. That he said he gets tattooed like twice a week for like the last like 10, 15 years. He said he spent like like $400,000 or something like that on tattooing and stuff like that. So it's like, it's a fun community. It's definitely, especially, the Fangs and Infernos, there's probably a lot of them out there that are in that world and stuff like that. It's one of those things that's like, maybe not as much as far as me with the body modification, but with the tattooing, an addictive thing, you know what I mean? You get to it and stuff like that. But I just love this movie because it just adds that, a little bit of culture to it, that little bit of like, this is how these people are. And yeah, they may be freaks or whatever like that. You might think they are, but they're just regular people that just have a hobby that's might be a little bit different than yours.
No, absolutely, for sure. And yeah, the like the modified like a like the modified like Barbie character, like Betty Boop character, that was Tristan Risk. She's absolutely fantastic. She actually did a movie called Ayla that I really, really
Yeah.
like. It doesn't have the highest rating to the common populace when it comes to horror fans, which actually makes me kind of sad because I actually think that movie is actually really cool. So I personally don't see it at the rating that it gets. If you want to look it up, that's all good. Fangs and Infernos, no worries. But like, I think Ayla is actually a really, really cool movie. It's kind of this dark, paranormal, almost kind of has a little bit of that like The Witch feel from Robert Eggers in a previous episode that Devil and I talked about as well. Really, really cool. But Tristan is absolutely fantastic. But no, absolutely. Because the thing I also like about American Mary is just that overall conflict of it. The idea of like you're starting off in this type of world, this type of society, learning these skills, trying to build yourself up to this standard, this time kind of like tier. You get offered this opportunity and you excel at it, but then you don't really know and you become kind of fearful of what risks maybe became involved in it. And then ultimately finding that you're very skilled, it can be very lucrative, and you're the person who just executes it properly. And then also ultimately leading up to again, and this is a shout out to the sisters as well, kind of understanding that twist. Because similar to Dead Hooker in the Trunk, which has a great twist, this one has a really great one as well. Because you get to the idea of like the I like basically the term of final girls is very ingrained in horror, especially nowadays. It's always been a thing, don't get me wrong. Like final girls have been a thing forever when it comes to horror. Hundreds of years back, even when you and I were still alive before horror film became a thing, and then when film became a thing, final girls were definitely always a concept. It was consistently a thing. Even so, as quick as Adrian King with, Friday the 13th, leading into Friday the 13th Part 2. But the thing about this is Jen and Sylvia get it with that twist, and you get the idea of a movie like American Mary that should have a final girl that's building up to it, literally to have the rug pulled out from under them. And that's something that I think that Jen and Sylvia really get and excel at. And in my opinion, is a little like, I think they're a little like, what's the term? Like, um, they're not recognized enough for it. There's a specific term I'm thinking of, and I can't really think of it. But it's definitely an underutilized and an unrecognized situation, is they are very good at that twist and setting you up for a fall, but not in the negative way. You know what I mean, my friend?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, that's what I love about this movie too, because it's like, not only, with that side, it's got the dark side where, she's, an aspiring doctor, surgeon and stuff like that. These guys see that she's making some extra money and stuff like that. So they assume that she's probably doing prostitution or something like that. So they
Right.
invite her to a party, kind of do do the the typical I'm really rich guy, I can do whatever I want to women and stuff like that, and then ultimately like she gets her revenge. And I love the fact that she uses the one guy as like her guinea pig to do all these body modifications, you know what I mean, like the amputating the arms and the legs, and
Yes.
giving him the ears, and cutting splitting the tongue, and doing all that kind of crazy shit to his body. I just love that because you're just like, you're the whole entire time, usually you feel sorry for a guy who's being tortured over and over and over again for a long extended period of time. But this guy, you're like, yeah, he pretty much deserves it, you know what I mean? And then, like I said, you got, like I said, with the girl that, like you were talking about with the twist ending with the girl who was the Barbie guy, her and her husband obviously knew that she was into the body modification and stuff like that. And then, she goes and does the extreme body modification that apparently he didn't care too much for it, you know, beats the living crap out of her to find out what happened to her, and then finds out that it was, the Betty Boop character, and then goes to Betty Boop's character and, tortures her and stuff like that, to the point where, she eventually tells about, about Mary, and then, going after Mary. But I love it at the very end, like typical, American Mary surgeon style, you know what I mean? She's just over here, sewing herself back up, trying to, make sure she doesn't die and stuff like that. But, yeah, I love that too. Too, like I said, you got dead girl, dead hooker in a trunk, obviously with the Soska sisters in it, as the main characters. Hey, why not? They if Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith can put themselves in the movies, why can't the Soska sisters? And I love their part in this movie, where the twins that are part of the body modification, and they want to swap arms, which I thought was really, really cool. And I just love their, like, the German accent that they have, even though they're Canadian. I love the we want to be part of each other. It's like okay, cool, to the point where it's like, that's kind of neat. But I'm like, would that work? I'm like, I don't know, maybe. Yeah, I mean, people get their hands, arms amputated and put sewed back on or whatever. I was like, maybe, but it's like, it's just a cool thing. I just love the fact that they're, willing to put themselves into these movies. Now, granted, like I said, dead hooker, they probably didn't have too much options, so they got to put themselves into the main role. But I like the fact that, periodically throughout these films, like when we go into the filmography, they like to, insert themselves into a little bit of roles. And I love it. It's like trying to find Stan Lee in the Marvel movies. You're like, oh, where are the Soskas gonna come out of nowhere somewhere?
And then bam, there they are.
Yep.
No, absolutely, Devil, for sure. And when it comes to this movie, I mean, again, it's a cool like twist at the end. Ultimately, Mary's being attacked and still ultimately comes out on top. But again, that's the very interesting twist ending at the end, is while she's trying to use her own surgical skills to save her own life, ultimately she bleeds out, and that's the end of it. And that's the thing I thought was very, very interesting and very kind of like wow about this movie, is like it's got this whole very kind of mafia feel of the movie. And am I doing things that could get me busted, or can I do these things and make a very lucrative living? It's very, very interesting. And I love the Soska's appearance as the twins. Like you said, it's fantastic. But ultimately, this is a really, really cool movie and a very, very cool, like just right on the mark movie to definitely be enjoyed. And it's super duper awesome. Now, the fun thing is, as we move into the next movie ish, is the funny thing about this is we go from two genuine movies to a movie that lasts about 6 seconds. And the reason I say that is this is kind of a fun situation. So, a funny little backstory when it comes to this is this particular movie we're about to get into, as an overall movie, has got a couple of different aspects when it comes to Vampire and Devil. So, Devil gets a lot of credit for this, for straight up being a bud, which I told him, and then it leads into this. Is so, Devil and I had recently gone to a con, had a great time, got some autographs, met some people. did some networking, and we're very stoked about what can come from that. Well, one of the people we got to meet was somebody that Vampire is incredibly familiar with, a big fan of, and very, very stoked to have gotten to meet. When it comes to his appearance, it is not relevant to the SOSKA sisters. His appearance is in a different letter of the alphabet. But the reason I bring that up is because again, Devil deserves the recognition for just being a bro. But anyway, a musician who I'm very, very fond of was in this movie and he signed it. And the only reason I'm putting it in here is because I really wasn't prepared for this. So when Devil and I went to his meet and greet, he actually was signing the DVD and got very excited about the fact that he had never signed one of these. And the fact of the matter is, his fan base is rabid. They're a cult style fan base. And I'm stoked for him, and he deserves it, and I'm happy that he has it. But it really did catch me off guard that he had never signed this DVD before, because you would think that a fan base as rabid as his, somebody would have brought that to him. But that was not the case. And I'm going to save this for a different opportunity because I feel like somewhere down the line, Devil and I might have some fun with some various cult style movies that maybe will allow for me to get a little bit more into my love affair of this particular artist. But that being said, Devil, let's talk a little bit about ABCs of Death Part 2, Torture Porn. Because if anybody's familiar with ABCs of Death, it's a two-part series. There's one DVD, well, there's one movie, and there's a second movie, two DVDs because they're both released, and we're going to talk about the second DVD. The movies are very, very quick. They're very short because for all of you Fangs and Infernos that are not familiar with, this is literally A to Z, all the ABCs as mini movies. So if you don't want this movie to be 5.5 hours long, they really got to be on their marks, and they're very short movies. But anyway, back on point, my friend. Letter T, torture porn for the Soska sisters.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, like you were saying, I mean, I've always been a fan. I always liked that where it's like, yeah, you have, whatever 26 movies, however many alphabet or whatever it is, and yeah, you literally just like each A is a different director, B director, C is a different director. I love the fact that yeah, it's like, oh yeah, so we got this one that we're gonna do that the Soskas were part of, but we're only really talking about technically a 6-minute movie or even less
Right.
because it's like and it is that one is some of the movies that are on that, some are a little bit longer, some are a
Yeah.
little bit shorter, you know what I mean, but they they're within a certain amount of time period. This one is like literally like really quick. It's a bunch of and it kind of goes back to almost American Mary, where it's like that those doctors and people being schemy and screamy and stuff like that. Where it's like it's a movie, they're auditioning and blah blah blah. We want you to do this. We want to see that. We want to do. Oh yeah, show us this and show us that. We're gonna be creepy. Passing couches. Harvey Weinstein. The kind of shit and stuff like that. Where yeah, then all of a sudden, homegirl's got a little bit of a secret behind her. She is I'm assuming I mean I don't know because there's really no it's so short. I'm assuming she's like a Cthulhu or some kind of shit. I don't like some fucking La Blue Girl demon or some shit. I don't know what's going on. She's got tentacles everywhere and killing everybody. I mean, who knows what the hell's going on? But yeah, she just like fucks everybody up. Like, oh yeah, ABC's of Death Part 2.
No, absolutely, brother. No, for sure. And it's crazy because, and again, I know it kind of sounds like we're blowing them, but it's really not meant to seem that way. It's not really meant to feel that way. But the fact of the matter is like Devil and I are horror people and we understand certain things. And the fact of the matter is unique executions of movies don't really get addressed in a certain proper way. And the idea of, especially with a movie where you literally have a handful of minutes to get it executed, is one thing. But for the Soska sisters to sign on to the particular, like, basically the particular script that deals with like hentai is a very tricky thing to be like, we are down for that. Because again, that's also a completely different culture. It's one thing for us to be like, hey, it's great that they're all about a twist ending. It's great that they understand this, semblance of like an understanding of audition and the idea of like torture or killing or do the mafia pay me enough to be their go-to person? ABCs of Death is a very, very small movie where you have to get the point across. And that's the thing I find so interesting about the way that the Suskas did it. And I do think, again, they understand some recommendations. Sorry, they deserve some like recognition for it. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some stuff we're going to get into that, not speaking for the devil, I'm only speaking for myself. I have some certain like ideas on it. And again, different strokes for different folks, different understanding, and we'll cross those bridges when we get to them. But this is one of those movies that, again, I do believe the Suskas deserve recognition for because, again, when your format and your execution time is that small, you really got to get it across. And hentai in a non-animated form, which is basically where I'm going in this rant, that's my point. And I really like their execution of this because I can assume with a movie like this based off what I saw in ABCs of Death Part 1, and I had already seen ABCs of Death Part 2 before Devil and I, revisited it as a thing to understand that, hey, you've got 6 minutes to make it last. And hentai in a real life form, not animated form, is what you got to go with. Devil, my friend, that's a tough sell. And honestly, I think Jen and Sylvia did very well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like it. Like I said, it's just one of those ones that like out of like most of the ones I remember from part two, at least, that was one of the ones that always stuck out the most for me. I like remember, I'm like, I couldn't remember what it was or which one movie it was, or even like even maybe not even remembering exactly who the directed because there's so many directed. I just remember. Oh man, I remember that one where yeah, there was a girl turns into like a freaking crazy ass hentai fucking monster or some kind of shit, and then be like, oh yeah, that was the Soska sisters. Oh, I guess that kind of makes sense, especially because them, being huge fans of horror, they're also like huge comic book geeks and stuff like
Yep,
that too, as well. They've done a couple of their own comics, so yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, that checks out. Just makes them even cooler in my book than to kind of add that aspect, that into that, that kind of realm of the world. And like I said, you're reaching out to, people who are, I mean, I'm not a huge anime person myself to begin with. I did like, a few little hentai stuff, like La Blue Girl and things like that, where because I liked it because it was just
we all loved La Blue Girl, my friend.
I just liked it because of I mean, obviously because the sexual nature, but just the extremely oddness of this, guy, especially with that one, this monster's got tentacles with penises on it, and it's just like so random and so weird. And then, like I said, I mean, the at least the hentai films that I've ever seen that were translated into non-animated films, you're just like, what the fuck is this? Is
Yeah.
beyond weird and dumb. But I think the way they did it was kind of cool. I liked it, and that was kind of neat. I'm like, maybe they should learn these guys and maybe do a little bit of like kind of like that because they made it definitely a lot more cooler and realistic. But still adding that aspect of that comic book world to the world of horror.
Absolutely, my friend, for sure. And as we move into the next couple of movies, I say, what do you say, my friend? Let's lay the smackdown on a couple of things. So
Yeah.
I love these movies. One of them is very much in traditionally what people know the Susk Sisters style to be. Then the other one we're going to get into, just a touch out of that. But we're going to start things off with the continuation of a series that I'm actually very fond of. I was a big fan from the first movie. I thought what Jen and Sylvia did with the second movie was great. And it's a fun thing to talk about, knowing that the Devils, whether Mrs. Devil likes it or not, is irrelevant. Let's talk a little bit about a cast member that is very much somebody that the devil fancies. Let's talk about See No Evil 2 featuring Danielle Harris. A very, very awesome movie. You and I are both wrestling guys. We've always been that way. Like the Fangs and Infernos, either know or are about to learn right now. When Devil and I designed this show, it was very, very simple. We wanted to do the idea of an awesome traditional horror podcast mixed with old school pro wrestling, where anonymity is a thing. That's why Devil and I speak very much about our hundreds of years of existence, living a long life. Now, the cool thing about that is that's why it's wrestling. Glenn Jacobs, Kane, dude takes no prisoners.
Yeah, the
And
Undertaker's
unfor-
brother.
and yep, exactly, the Undertaker's brother. And of course, my friend, unfortunately, your, you may love your Mrs. Devil, but there's another Mrs. Devil in your life, and she did not survive this one. Spoiler alert, sorry, not sorry. See No Evil 2, my friend. I thought Jen and Sylvia did a great job continuing this series.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I may be a little bit biased because you said, with Daniel Harris being in this film, and then also Catherine bringing back from American Mary in this film. That those two being in this film, I'm just gonna say it right now. It's I don't care if anybody agrees or doesn't agree. See No Evil 2 is a better sequel than See No Evil 1, just because those two are in it.
My
And
God.
the fact that you got the Soska sisters in it. So I mean, that's just a four-way that can't be denied. The four of them together in one movie is the greatest sequel to ever be made.
I'm with you, my friend, for sure. When it comes to See No Evil 2, I mean, it's awesome. I love the fact that the sisters did their research. Again, assuming that they did the research, but again, I'm sure they did. They're pros, they know the deal. You know, when it comes to this, I love the idea of Kane's, extension into this movie. The idea, it reminds me so much of that, like, kind of Art the Clown for like modern day Fangs and Infernos, that kind of continuation of somebody that you were completely sure was dead and it was a wrap, and not so much. You know, Mrs. Vamp and I are big wrestling people just like you are. Kane was at an event recently that we were all at, but unfortunately, he was only there for like a short amount of time. I think he had like a 3 hour window, and we had like other interviews and things we had to do. And unfortunately, like, Kane wasn't able to stick around when it came to that. I don't remember if it was MMC where we weren't officially working, but we were like meeting people we needed to, or if it was another con that he just had such a short window. But I promised Mrs. Vamp that I will definitely allow her to meet Kane. And also, that being said, like, we even talked about this recently about, hey, if we get the opportunity to meet, Kane, we'd love to get him on See No Evil. If we have the opportunity to meet the Soskas, we would love to get them on See No Evil with Kane if he's on there, or possibly with, ABCs of Death, considering that's a musician that I'm a big fan of and he was down for the cause. A lot of cool opportunities, but that's for another conversation. The idea of like this one, this is definitely in the running. I agree with you, my friend, of a better sequel because I like the idea of the way that it's written for Kane to do his thing, kind of resurrecting, taking people out, but also has that very Texas Chainsaw feel of it, of does everybody survive? And maybe they do, maybe they don't, maybe Devil's pissed, maybe he's not. The question to you guys, our beloved Fangs, Infernos, and RIPs, is have you seen See No Evil Part 2? And do you know what Devil and I are referencing? Devil, my friend, I love a good old fashioned simplistic, everybody's in one venue running for their lives. And do they survive or do they not? I've always been a sucker for these kind of movies because I love the simplicity of not making me think farther than I need to. Let me just stay in the moment and show me what I need to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I just love it. Like I said, they bring it in, bring in all the victims from the first movie. Obviously bring in Kane. You know what I mean? Is dead, and he's got no vitals or nothing, and just like a lot of these monster horror movie monsters. Like Freddy or Jason, or especially Jason and stuff like that, where it's like, what brings them back to life? Oh, a good old humping. You know what I mean? It's she gets on top of him, kind of rides, and then all of a sudden starts having sex with the one dude, and lo and behold, the sin brings him back to life, and he just starts going on a tear. And like I said, I love it. It's just like I said, that's why I think the reason, I mean, other than, like I said, other than the four females that are involved in this film, that's why I kind of like this movie a little bit more, because it goes just into the action a lot more. Boom, just straight up right into the action. For the first one, it's a little bit more of a story they got to tell. They got to talk about, him, his childhood with his mom and blah, blah,
You
blah.
got
And
it.
you got to do this and do this. Where this one is just like, even though they do talk a little bit about that in this, kind of give you that flashback of all that stuff. I just love it because it's just more of like, just straight up like, balls to the wall. He's just messing people up, and it's just so great because like everybody in this movie is so tiny compared to him. So I feel like he naturally just grabbed every one of those actors and threw them around like a rag doll, to the point where they're like, "Okay, can you tell Kane not to throw me as hard as he possibly can?"
No, totally, my friend. And that's the thing when it comes to this one too. Like I love again, I'm always a big fan of movies that just keep it simple, where everybody's in the venue, in this case, the morgue, and running for their lives. And the fact that Daniel Harris's character is, kind of steering the ship, but then trying to like survive with like her love interest and the idea of like, do they make it or do they not? And the thing about this movie is, again, unfortunately, Fangs and Infernos, you do have to deal with a lot of spoiler alerts when it comes to these episodes, because Devil and I can't break them down properly without talking about certain things. Is the idea that somebody like Danielle Harris, who is like a legendary final girl, this movie, she is not a final girl. And this is also a stylistic design of a third movie that at this moment we have not gotten, where the villain is the victor. And Devil and I have talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Of course, all of you guys know about, Leatherface's longstanding history, as well as other things that we're big fans of. Things about House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, all the way up through Three from Hell, with the exception of Sid Haig's Captain Spaulding character. But the fact of the matter is, that was a decision that had to be made due to Sid's, declining health. Is that these are a series of movies, Leatherface, Rob Zombie stuff, where, and there's other movies as well, where the villain continues to be the victor and take people out, whether you think they're going to survive or not. Devil and I even had a recent conversation about 2001 Maniacs. Um, the there was no final people in that movie. It ended with an incredibly awesome barbed wire decapitation to end the movie. Not every movie gives you a final person, and this is unfortunately is very much that way. But the one thing I also thought was very cool about this movie, Devil, is there's actually this one direction where you would think would have been the absolute perfect way to kind of take down a corpse would be to stab them and start kind of filling them with the embalming fluid, where the movie kind of looks like they've got him and it's a wrap, and that's the perfect way to take him down. Ultimately, for it to get restarted with a good old kind of old school machete through a door, through Danielle, kind of letting you know that it wasn't that easy to take down somebody who's truly evil, possessed by evil.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's just like I said, and it's just cool, because I mean, when this movie too, you know, especially with with Kane being in it, and it being a a considered a WWE sanctioned movie, the WWE films and stuff like that. It was one of the first ones that I remember watching that I actually like, especially with this first See No Evil. You know what I mean? It was
Mhm.
one, including See No Evil one and this one where it was one of the first ones that I remember the WWE films that they did that I actually enjoyed. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Because a lot of times, when WWE was coming out with these films and stuff like that, and I'm not saying people who were wrestlers, going into film were, Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper and, some of the Rock movies and things like that. The ones that were actually like sanctioned by Vince McMahon in WWE is the WWE films. Most of them were like those cheesy, like John Cena films that were like,
Yeah.
the I'm a a freaking
12 rounds and the Marine.
the Marines and all that kind of stuff. Most of those were kind of like, just like, okay. I mean, if you enjoyed them, you enjoyed them, but they were pretty mindless, like stupid movies. And like I said, I remember this one was like, it was like, oh, it's a WWE film, and I'm like, oh God, okay, it's gonna be horrible. I like Kane, but okay, I'll check it out and stuff like that. But I actually, like I said, I enjoyed, like I said, the first one and the second one, and to the point where it was like, okay, cool. It's good that they can go out and source out to these other people and make these films and stuff like that, and it's not all like completely cheesy where it's like one of those ones where like, yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that Kane does in these films were definitely very WWE style, choke slams and shit like that kind of stuff, but it wasn't too over the top where it was like so cheesy where they're like, he's not doing RKO's to somebody in the middle of nowhere or something like that. Like, why would you even do that move? That move makes no sense. Choke slamming someone, okay, I can kind of understand, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
some of the stuff they were doing, it's like, okay, yeah, yeah, he's not gonna tombstone somebody. Like, nobody does that in real life. Sorry.
No, absolutely, my friend, for sure. And I mean, it was kind of cool. The only thing I kind of like made me a little sad when it came to this movie. And again, this is simply a personal preference. I like See No Evil 2 quite a bit. I think it's great. Like Devil and I talked about, he and I are probably on the level with this. Like I would genuinely consider See No Evil 2 as a better sequel than See No Evil 1. But the one thing that See No Evil 1 did establish that I kind of dug that I didn't really get in See No Evil 2 that made me a little sad, but based on where it took place, it made sense. I liked the whole hook on a chain way of executing people, or at least dragging them to where they needed to be. I really liked that as an aesthetic, you know, choice, like a killing weapon for this character. Where, in my opinion, again, I don't know enough about the inner workings of that movie to like discredit or talk shit to the Soskas about the style of it. But the whole, for lack of a better term, Jason's machete for this movie, I wasn't as big into that personally. I would have preferred them to find a way to implement the whole hook on a chain. And again, I understand because this movie basically takes place, for lack of a better term, in a morgue based off the first movie, that not being available does make sense. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm shitting on it or judging, especially the Soskas themselves, because I can tell you, Fangs and Infernos, straight up, that when Devil and I post this episode, the Soskas are going to be tagged to death in this episode because we definitely want them to check it out. So I do want to make that a point of saying that I'm not judging it per se. I just missed that weapon because I enjoyed its use and it made for great cinema for that character. But I fully do understand that the idea and the environment of where the second movie took place does make that a challenge. So I don't love the Jason Machete style, kind of Jason X kind of thing, but I don't have a problem with understanding that when you're a killer in a new environment, dude, you're gonna make it work with whatever's available. So that's the way it is, Fangs and Infernos. But you know what, Devil? We're going to go from the big red machine, the monster cane, and we're going to talk a little bit about, well, it's the big show. And here's the funny thing there, my friend. What happens when you pit WWE's The Big Show up against Superman? You get Vendetta.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's such a crazy. It's like it's so crazy to think about that. Like people, most people, watching it, like maybe if some, some people are gonna know and stuff like that. But like a lot of people don't realize. It's like, yeah, it's just funny that yeah, you got the, the monster Big Show and stuff like that. But everybody pretty much probably knows him and stuff like that. But then like Dean Cain, some people might know him from this or from that and from that. But a lot of the old school heads are gonna know him from the Lois and Clark, TV series. So it is kind of funny that it is, you got it. And then like where would such an epic battle happen? Let's do it. Why not in the prison? So and
Seriously,
like
I
I
didn't
guess
even
that's
realize that was him at first.
yeah. And it's a cool movie. I mean, yes, the storyline is not anything that like we've talked about before. It's not breaking any, not breaking any molds. It's been
Yeah,
done a bunch of times where, somebody does something bad to his family member or something like that and goes to jail and a guy goes to go to jail to get revenge and it's done. But I still think it's a cool movie. I've always liked the concept of the story. I love the going like that. Like I love the brutalness, and like I said, and
yeah,
me not really being a big huge Dean Cain fan. I'm like I mean I don't hate the guy. I'm not against the dude or whatever.
totally
I was
same.
never really a big to me. Christopher Reeve was my Superman. I was more into the Superman movies. I
Yeah,
wasn't really into like the TV series. My friend watched that or like Smallville or any of those other Superman ones. So for me, like I always knew who he was, and Dean Cain's been, if you look at his IMDb page, yeah, a lot of his stuff is a lot of those like cheesier, kind of low budget like action films and stuff like that. So I knew his pedigree of doing this, but like I never really, really bought into his movies and things to begin with. So I was just like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I thought he did really well in this movie.
yeah,
I think he acted really well. I think like I said, not as people will go, oh, WWE wrestlers are all movie stars or somewhat anyway. I'm like, not really. There's a lot of bad
yeah.
movies that WWE stars have been in that not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean that it's because of their acting, and sometimes it's just a script, but there are just other ones that just like there's a bunch of them out there where it's just like yeah, this is bad. And like I said, and I liked Big Show. I thought I liked his,
Yeah.
portrayal in this movie. I thought he did pretty good. And it was, had a little bit of that wrestling, cheese to it, but I still think it was fun, you know what I mean? And entertaining and yeah, I know Dean Cain is, supposed to be Superman, but I mean, as little as Dean Kane in and as big as Big Show
Yeah.
is, that should have been that match should have lasted a little less longer. You know what I mean? But I always loved that. You know, even when they talked about that in the WWE world, they're always talking about like, you know. People who are strong and stuff like that. And a lot of people talk about, the Big Show, where, he was kind of like, you know, I guess the '90s and the late '90s, early 2000s version of Andre the Giant, where he's just a guy that like when he hits you and he does stuff, he's not doing it at full force because if he
Yeah.
grabs you and does something at full force, he's so big and strong. But I always liked the one story that they always talked about, especially with with Big Show when they asked him like, what wrestler did you wrestle that like do you think was the strongest? And a lot of like ones that they were talking about, people you would think that he's wrestled in his career, you would think someone like a Goldberg or like what's his name what the hell is that the MMA fighter that fights what the hell the big dude I can't remember what his name is right now.
Oh, Brock
Brock
Lesnar.
Lesnar. The Brock Lesnar, you would think that and stuff like that, but he actually says
Yeah.
that like the strongest guy he's ever wrestled was actually John Cena. He's like that
Mhm.
guy is he everybody who picks me up. Usually I have, people know in the wrestling business when you pick up people a lot of
You
times
gotta
it's
jump.
the wrestler that's getting picked up is kind of helping along with being able to get picked up. He's like, no, John Fireman carries me like I don't need any help. He's like that dude is freakishly strong. It's like
I
he
saw
picks
that
me up
too.
and holds yeah, he picks me up and holds me on there and I'm like that's crazy. So yeah, no, that's just crazy to see. Like, yeah, so I mean, I guess like in theory, if John, if Dean Kane, practicing the little moves and got some John Cena in him, maybe he might be able to fare a little better in this in Vendetta. But just like in the WWE world, uh, Vendetta was scripted, and unfortunately, the Big Show had to go down.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, it's just like you were saying, Devil. Like you're right when it comes to that kind of stuff, because some of them are just kind of script or weird, just badly written, or just kind of weird concepts. Like you and I had the opportunity potentially to meet Hornswoggle recently. It didn't work out. He had to cancel his appearance. No harm, no foul. But he was in one of the Leprechaun movies, The Leprechaun Origin, and that movie, honestly, it's not that great. I have it on the shelf. We love the Leprechaun series. And there was also no way that I wasn't gonna get a movie that's got Hornswoggle, who I really did love that character in WWE in a movie. Um, but that movie it's just badly executed. It's got a good it's got a good script behind it, just badly written. But also, because I don't want to get on like a diatribe here, I'm just kind of, piggybacking off of your point. Like The Marine with John Cena. I personally found that movie to be pretty solid. I don't think John's the greatest actor. I do think he's gotten a lot better, more roles that he's done. I'm starting to enjoy him a lot more when he pops up in movies. But I thought that The Marine was solid. I have not seen the other movies with The Miz. I'm not knocking The Miz, but since that Marine franchise is now, from what I hear, like 5 movies deep, I'm a little less intrigued to see it. John did a movie called like 12 Rounds. I I haven't seen it. I've heard that it's not really the greatest movie out there. Kane, however, I liked the See No Evil movies, both with and without the SOSKAs, which is kind of the reason why I'm bringing this up. I think those 2 movies are both executed quite well. I like the stories, I like the directing, respectively, between both movies, and I like the casts. So definitely, just like you said, same thing with The Rock. You know, the terrible CGI of The Mummy Returns when The Rock is in that weird ass scorpion thing. But the Scorpion King movie, I still to this day really enjoyed. I think it's really great. But anyway, to each his own. Metal Summoners, when it comes to wrestlers in movies, form your own opinions. Go check some of them out. But again, well, it's the big show, and Devil and I are going to get back on track. Anyway, Yeah, when it comes to this movie, Devil, I think it's cool, brother. Like, it's fun. It's the only non-horror movie that the Soskas have done so far, but I don't think it's a bad movie. I think they did a great job directing. I think everybody collectively was solid. And, it's just kind of like interesting. It's kind of weird having like the guy gets busted and he gets out and he seeks his revenge just to go back to jail. I mean, don't get me wrong, the he set the premise because we haven't really gotten into that just to give the Fangs and Infernos a little bit about what this movie's about, which we haven't really gotten into yet. So we'll end this discussion just with filling them in a little bit about what they have to look forward to. So basically, Dean Cain busts the Big Show's character. And for revenge, the Big Show's character gets out, murders his wife, frankly, very brutally, like literally big fist beats this chick to death. It's insane. And then he's coping, doesn't cope well, decides to get himself arrested and thrown into prison by murdering like these like lackeys from the drug cartel or the gang or however you want to put at it, pretty much in front of his former partner, well, his partner, now former partner, and goes to jail. And it's a pretty gnarly thing. He takes his licks as he's like kind of building up his reputation as this like hero cop, now turned murderer, but just kind of living his life, but still can't really be fucked with because he definitely does some gnarly stuff. There's some gnarly kills, there's some quality stabbings, and there's a good old-fashioned gunshot to the head when it comes to the end of the movie. So it's a cool thing. Just like you said, brother, it's not going to win any awards. It's just a good old, if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's a good old-fashioned, revenge in jail tale. But it's a cool movie and it's a lot of fun. And I actually give Jen and Sylvia a lot of credit for kind of tackling this, which is slightly outside of their pedigree. Because personally, my friend, I think it's cool. I thought it was a good time and I thought they did a good job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I said, to me, I like the movie. Like I said, to me, it's one of those ones that like, would I have watched it, if the Soska sisters didn't do it? Maybe, you know what I mean? Like I said, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not gung ho about going and seeing Dean Cain films, but okay.
Mhm.
Like I said, I'm like, okay, cool. It's got the Big Show in it. I'm like, I don't mind the Big Show. I mean, I've always, I liked him. I liked him more in the WCW,
Yeah.
NWO
The
days and
Giant.
stuff like that when he was the Giant. But yeah, but I mean, I've always liked him as a wrestler, and I was like, I'll go and see, a movie, until I watch a couple of them, and I'm like, okay, this guy is horrible at acting. He should stick to doing this or doing that. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because, like you said, even with John Cena, like to me, I hated all those old school John Cena movies. I didn't
Mhm.
start liking him until he started getting into these like more ruder and cruder and naughtier and comedy kind of things and stuff like that. I love that. And then obviously, you know, Peacemaker is like the greatest shit ever because it's like,
Dude, that
you know,
TV show was so fun, dude. You deserve so much credit for letting me know about that when we fucking binged the shit out of it. Because I was aware of it. I knew that it was like pretty cool and superhero. Because I saw the Suicide Squad. So I was
yeah.
aware of this character. But when you were like, bro, the music in this movie is so up your alley that just come over and watch it. Man, do you deserve credit for that.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like I said, I've like, started watching some of the other stuff that he's come out with. So it's like, yeah. So I mean, like I said, I mean, I would probably maybe have watched it, but in general, I probably more than likely wouldn't have seen this movie if it wasn't a Soska Sisters film. I just remember when
Same.
it did come out, I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'll go see it. Yeah, it's not necessarily something that, like you said, it's not a horror film. It's not really in their realm, but it's still like it's still piggybacking off of working with See No Evil and working with Kane and doing the WWE movies and stuff like that and kind of doing this. So it's like to me, you know what I mean? It's like like, okay, cool, you know what I mean? I'm all for it, you know. I'm all for, seeing people do different things, sometimes, like I said, when we do these directors and stuff like that, sometimes, you go off a different path and you try something different and it doesn't work, and that's okay. I mean, not everything is gonna be great, that you do and stuff like that. Even like I said, with some of these directors we talked about, these late great guys, you know what I mean? Like people who are like, are gods among the, of the director worlds and stuff like that, like the Wes Cravens and the John Carpenters and George Romero's. They had movies that were, subpar or even
Totally.
below par and stuff like that. You have that. So I mean, but so it was like, okay, cool. You go and you try something different. For me, I don't think that's I don't, like I said, I don't put this movie as a subpar movie. I'm just
Nope.
saying that, like, it's cool. And for me, doing something that was a little bit different, I think they did a really, really, really good job on it. I think it was a cool movie and stuff like that, and it was fun to watch. It's entertaining. I have watched it a couple times. Like I said, it's definitely not, not something that I'll probably watch all the time. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
once in a while, it's like, oh yeah, yeah. If I see it on there, I'm like, see it on Tubi or something like that, or see something that flops through, and I'm like, oh man, I haven't seen this movie for a little while. I'll check it out. But yeah, it's cool, and and that's the cool thing about the Soska sisters. When they do this, you go into, going into, older territory or new territory, you know what I mean, doing something like out of their will. And then they kind of go back into their will of horror, but try something different that a lot of people are not completely always fond of. Me and Vampire ourselves have both said it before. You've got a lot of people out there that do it. We're not the biggest fans of people remaking horror films, not
Yeah.
necessarily not saying that we're against every remake, because obviously we have those, we have that, part of our showdowns where we have ones that we think that are better remakes than the
Yeah.
originals. But you know what I mean? In general, we're always like, just like everybody else, man, Hollywood needs to come up with some newer ideas instead of remaking all these
Totally.
films. And some certain films, especially with certain films that, like, I can understand they're older or the
Yeah.
technology now is a little bit better. Like some of those I kind of understand. But then again, you got ones where it's like that. And that kind of goes into this, sort of a weird segue of the Soska's remaking a movie that should be sacrilegious to remake,
I
but
am a
really
Cronenberg guy,
yeah. Yeah,
and
which, like I said, it should be definitely sacrilegious, but it's one of those ones where, like, ooh, you found out about it, and you're like, oh man, I don't know. I mean, if it's like one of those ones like when Rob does it, okay, Rob's gonna do this remake. Okay, this person's gonna do that remake. Okay, maybe I'll give it a shot. But it's one of
yeah,
those ones like, oh man, that's some tough shoes, and that's like we were saying with in the next film from the Soska sisters of them remaking Rabid. We're like I
yes,
said, we're both huge fans of Cronenberg, and he's a
oh yeah,
when it comes to that. But then again, like, a lot of the stuff that they've done before is a lot of body horror and stuff
yep,
like that. American Mary is definitely a body-ish horror kind of film. So it makes sense for them to kind of like, okay, this is what we like to do. Let's just remake this film, because I mean that's one that's really good to remake. It's an older film that came out in the 70s and stuff like that. So you can kind of make it different. And that's what I'll say. It's like, when it comes to that, yeah, should it have been remade? Maybe not. Am I glad
yeah,
that they remade it? Yes. I actually
yeah,
think they did a really, really good job of this film. I think it's one of the. I'll put it maybe I definitely not going to say that it's a better remake than the original, because like I said, I mean, Cronenberg. There's not too many things that I don't think anybody that could remake that could be better than his visions of the film. But I think it's a good remake of a film. It's one of those ones that, like, I think is just as solid and just as good and just as entertaining as the original.
totally. I'm definitely with you on that. It's a high quality remake, and I love the fact that the Soska sisters tackled it. I think it's hilarious that they kept their little mini streak of wrestlers in their movies alive when it came to this movie. I'll be honest, overall, it's not my favorite of the movies that they've done. We love Cronenberg. We've talked about The Brood and David on plenty of occasions, and you and I have also discussed fun little spoiler alert for our Fangs and Infernos and our RIPs. Devil and I have had discussions of Cronenberg. We will make that decision on if we decide to do an episode for him. But we do love us some Cronenberg. Now, anyway, that being said, I like this movie a lot, just like you. I think it's very solid. I really do like their spin on it. It's a little bit of a hard sell for me. I was into the movie the whole time, from start to finish, opening credits to end credits. I definitely enjoy the movie, but I can't quite put my finger on exactly what it was that doesn't have it higher up on my Soska Sisters list. And don't get me wrong, you and I went into this episode knowing that there were only so many Soska movies for us to even discuss for a director's episode. But that's also what makes this so fun, is it's more of a modern day director's episode for us. But this movie I felt a slight disconnect on this movie personally. Again, I enjoy it. I love the take of body horror. I love the overall execution. And I do think they have an amazing way of understanding how to translate from a very touchy subject through the screen to make people understand or wonder why or where they're going. And that's something I really did like about Rabid. One thing I do got to say about this movie that I thought was really, really cool and incredibly morbid at the same time in the greatest way. Is there anything seriously more fucked up in the world than having a genuinely pretty girl looking at her now fucked up appearance while Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is playing in the background? Like everything about what is like happy and enjoyable and lovey about the holidays while you're having this genuinely sad personal moment that is incredibly, like I said, morbid and just fucked up. But it's fucked up on a great, great level, and I love it. But I remember sitting there watching it, being like, damn, that is horrible. And that is really mean. But again, I like the ideas behind it. I like the style, and I really liked the execution. I loved the way they visualize the practical effects to come through, where you still have that rabid zombie feel to it, but also again mixed with that body horror where half of a third of this girl's face is just gone and fucked up and like cannibalized, kind of cannibalized meets like skeleton vibes, where it's now it's all wrapped up, bandaged up for healing that they're hoping for, healing that's damn sure not gonna happen. And I just think it was a very well done movie. Again, I do have a little bit of disconnect personally. I'm still trying, even to this day. I've seen the Jen and Sylvia's version of Rabid multiple times, and I still have I haven't quite gotten there yet. There's a little disconnect, and it might just be a vampire thing. It might just be me trying to figure something out personally. Maybe it also is because I really genuinely love the way that Cronenberg did his version, that even though I love the bloodlust and the modernized version of what Jen and Sylvia did, because I do think it's very solid, Cronenberg has a way of doing things on kind of that grainy visual execution that almost makes them feel strangely personal, but also equally as just kind of out there, you know, where it's like almost kind of like a very spacey effect where you're sitting back and still kind of figuring things out or trying to understand. Using a movie that you and I have already talked about in The Brood, where you've got this killer kid style and the way they're acting and the way they're reacting, mixed with this low budget, low budget feel, grainy delivery of these kind of mutant type children in hoodies that he just had a way of doing things in a very unique way. Where again, I do think that this movie feels more it has that remake feel to it, but not in an overly negative way. Because again, Rabbit is also one of those movies that frankly you kind of have to know about it. So this movie for the Soskas will come across much more as a standalone movie that they've done, where you have to actually do some research to realize that there's a movie that preceded it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, like I said, unless you're a huge, horror, fan, a horror buff guy, or just a huge Cronenberg fan, it's definitely one of those ones that a lot of people don't know as much as far as the original one, which is kind of weird, just because, the main girl in the original one is Marilyn Chambers, so it's like you have an ex-porn star, basically in this film and stuff like that. So but I love the fact that like I like the new one. I like you said, I love the effects of like her face all fucking mangled. It's very like Two-Face Skeletor kind of
Yeah,
freaking Roy. And I love when it gets down to the weird shit at the end. It's very H.P. Lovecraft,
super HP Lovecraft.
very really freaking like Cthulhu-ish kind of weird kind of shit. It's like I like that. I like the little extra, sauce that they put into this one with it being like, this thing that's basically healing her is basically like some kind of weird alien entity kind of
Yeah,
thing. So, yeah, I like that. Like I said, to me, I think it's a different kind of spin because it's one of those ones, like I said, being a Cronenberger film, the Cronenberger film and stuff like that, you're kind of tackling on something that a lot of people are gonna find holy or sacred and stuff like that. So it's like it's really cool, but you know what I mean. I give it up for them for them tackling it, and it's kind of an interesting story too. So it's like you got this one where they're tackling a remake of a beloved horror director, and then going into the next one, the final film so far from the Soskas, which is the to be original,
yes,
Festival of the Dead. I love the fact that this movie is sort of a love letter and a continuation of the George Romero original Night of the Living Dead film. To the
yes.
point where even the girl that's in this film, the main character in this film, her uncle, I'm pretty sure it was her uncle. I think that's who he was, but it was basically Ben, the main character from Night of the Living Dead that killed all the zombies and then gets in the what, not George Romero, the Savini one with
Savini.
with Tony Todd and stuff like that, when like that. So the main guy, and that I love the fact that that's her uncle, that you even have his gun that he had when it happened. I love that's like, the 50-year anniversary of,
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead all happened. And what better way to celebrate and to honor those who have perished in a horrible event like the Night of the Living Dead, where zombies came out and came back from the dead and killed people, than to commemorate it with drugs, rock and roll, sex, more
Rich,
drugs,
rich kids.
and rich kids and raves in the middle of the woods.
Absolutely, devil, 100%. I know, like I think this movie was great. I really loved this movie. I thought it was cool that it was a Tubi original, so I think that's really awesome for Jen and Sylvia to get involved in that way. Because again, you and I talked about it already. Tubi loves them some SOSKA sisters. Now, whether or not they like, so for example, Mrs. Vamp got me turned on to Tubi. I was not aware of Tubi for a really, really long time, mostly because up until the last like 2 years, I didn't have a smart TV. So I didn't have these, free movie apps at my disposal to discover things. Now, whether or not Tubi loved the Soska sisters before Festival of the Living Dead, is irrelevant. Only longtime Tubi fans are going to know that. But that doesn't change the fact that I love the fact that Tubi, though what I do know, is very, very loyal to independent horror movies. And that I really love. In fact, a lot of my coffin nails are because I can go on to Tubi, simply type in vampire movies, and just get 50 things to choose from depending on my mood. Now, that being said, bringing it back to this, I think it's absolutely great. I love the execution of this movie. I'm super stoked for the sisters to be able to hopefully keep a very, very strong, relationship with Tubi to either allow for upcoming, original movies, or if they do other opportunities to be able to possibly show them. Like, for example, ABCs of Death. Both of those movies were put out by Magnet. And I don't personally know what their relationship is to other streaming services. I haven't personally seen ABCs of Death pop up on my normal streaming services. Like, we both have Tubi, we've got Netflix, I'm aware of Shudder, of course, and all that, and Disney Plus and so on and so forth. But ABCs of Death is not something that I see come up on the regular, both either part one or part two. So kind of who knows when it comes to those type of situations. But I thought this was a really, really just cool movie, super fun. It stayed very in the vein of it. And I loved the fact that this movie definitely had a very quality style of original Night of the Living Dead, remake of Night of the Living Dead, and in my opinion, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, where it's got those, for me personally, are what I think are the three best like movies that kind of encompassed this one to allow for a really quality tribute, or however you want to look at it, however they designed it, you know, look at what George did for us. And of course, throwback, as you Fangs and Infernos know, the first director's episode that Devil and I ever did was George Romero. So it's very cool to circle back around with the Soskas for their interpretation of a night, day, dawn, you know, of the Dead movie for them to do in Festival of the Dead. I think it's really cool. You get that same great formula of just killing off bitchy teenagers that are in the way, but I loved the practical effects. I thought it was so well done. I thought the looks were good, crisp, clean. The actors playing them, I thought the zombies were portrayed very, very well. But I also really like the color scheme of this movie as well, where it's not that darker style, like black and white style of the original, but it's not overly bright and glitzy and glammy, like they're really trying to show something really bright and vibrant. It almost kind of has this like psychedelic feel to it. It actually reminds me a little bit of a movie I did in a Coffin Nails like last season called Bliss, that has a little bit more of a psychedelic feel to it. And I love the overall execution of this movie, where it's got, of course, the traditional colors of a color movie, but it's got some more vibrant type, violets and greens and stuff that come across when it's necessary. And you kind of have to catch it, because I don't really feel like it's really put out there in a way, but it was something that I noticed where I just thought the color palette of this movie was really well done.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean even like throwing in, that little homages for, like you were talking about with, Night of the Living Dead and stuff like that. I'd even throw a little bit of like Return of the Living Dead because you have that little bit of that punk feel to it with the
True.
characters and stuff like that with, with the two characters, that coming into the festival and they have that kind of like punk fuck you, kind of mentality to it. So even throwing a
Definitely.
little bit of that. And I like the girl that, that the main girl that's in this, the more punker girl, because she was
Mhm.
a Catwoman in the Gotham TV series, and
Oh
I
yeah.
always thought she was really, she was super cool. I thought that was great. You even get a little bit of a SOSKA sisters dancing in the and
Yep.
partying at at the festival and stuff like that too. But yeah, I was like, and I liked the names of the weird bands and stuff like that they were like, and I was like, what the hell? It was crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, I like that. You even had like the band even on stage while shit's going down and stuff like that. I love the big, we're gonna burn like, like burning the witch and stuff like that. But you got that big ass freaking, zombie freaking rock thing or something like that. Yeah, I thought it was just a cool. I thought it was a cool movie. It was just like, you know what I mean. It's yeah, I mean it like again with the you're mindless stupid kids doing mindless stupid things and then all of a sudden bad things are gonna happen. But it's like, yeah, it's like, even there's like, well, this is pretty fucked up that they're doing all this shit to, in this, in this festival. It's like, how is this even paying even any? This is like the complete opposite of what you should be doing for, memorial and remembering and stuff like that. It's just basically, it's basically a marketing scheme, and I love that where it's kind of like, yeah, it's like let's see how much money we can make off these people and stuff like that. It kind of reminded me like a little bit of like the Fry Festival and stuff like that, with
Yeah.
where it's just like nothing's there. Like, where is everything? Where's everybody at? Like, where the hell is all, and stuff like that. So it was pretty crazy. But yeah, I thought it was a fun movie. It was definitely like you said, it was one of those ones that was entertaining. You know what I mean? I think even in the realm of the George Romero films, going back to Land of the Dead and Diary of the Dead and all that. I think that, I put that in there. Actually, I feel like I like this one better than Diary of the Dead. I think this one was
Oh
it was
yes.
definitely executed as much as we know. We talked about how much, the last couple of Dead films were not really that great, but I still like that, you throw that a little bit in there, and like I said, throw a little bit of that old school into it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to to seeing, with this and stuff like that, if, maybe they continue on with this, with the Festival of the Dead movie, or like, whether or not it, the continuation of like, what's going on. Cause like, now that that festival produced a decent amount of zombies in that are going to be roaming around the world. So are they gonna, is another outbreak gonna happen again or something like that? So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to seeing that, and just looking forward to seeing, what the Soska sisters are going to do next. You know what I mean? I know they've been busy, doing the conventions and stuff like that. They obviously are. They've been touring around a lot for their comic books and stuff like that they've been doing and
On
stuff
East
like that.
Coast, East Coast, East Coast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, yeah, more Easter Coast, I guess, so we can get it because they've been coming, but they've been coming more mid-range, like more Chicago, more like Midwest kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd definitely like to see them, come around, come back around this area again, just because it'd be cool to go, finally, get to see them and stuff like that. But yeah, it'd be cool to see. I'm looking forward to seeing what else they get into because like I said, I'm all big, obviously we're big fans of their movies and stuff like that, but I just like their, I like their directions and how they, interpret things and how they add stuff and how certain things you can just tell are just like in, some of these movies when you're talking about it, you're like, oh, you can tell a Quentin Tarantino movie or a Kevin Smith movie or a Rob Zombie movie or something like that. They have that certain style to them where you can like, this looks like it would be a Soska Sisters movie. Is it a Soska Sisters movie? Oh shit, it is, or or like somebody who may be a newer person might be like, oh, I wonder if they were kind of, influenced by some of the stuff like that. So it's cool to see, you know what I mean? Especially like I said, we talked about American Mary and stuff like that was very influenced, by audition. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing maybe somebody, a newer director coming out and be like, well, yeah, I made this movie because I was a huge fan of American Mary and I like that one, so I came up with this idea. So it's always cool to see little things like that. And like I said, I mean, I've always heard really, really great things about them in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just from seeing, from their social pages and stuff like that about them, just like it's one of those ones where, they sometimes they tell you not to meet your heroes and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? When it comes to, becomes the them, definitely anybody out there, the Fangs and Infernos get a chance to meet them. I've always heard nothing but great things about like meeting them. Like they're just like super over static and stuff like that, to the point like I even remember, like, back in the day, one time I remember, years ago on Twitter they were talking about kitty cats because they're both huge kitty cats fan. They're like, oh, we want to see all your kitties. And I gave them a picture of one of my cats that that is now passed away and stuff like that. And they're like, oh my god, this is the coolest looking cat ever and stuff like that. So just like I love the fact that you can message them on Twitter, or X now or whatever it is, or Facebook or Instagram, and they're right there. Like, they'll comment right back, or send them a message and stuff like that. So it's super cool that they're all about that. And what's cooler than a bone saw that says American Mary? And that's the thing. The one thing when we were talking about that you didn't mention that I think is a funny story. I'm going to add a little extra to it, and then you can
No,
continue on to
I
it.
meant to address it at the time, but we just kind of got into the vibe. So take it away, my friend.
But the fact that I remember when that came in, you were like, "How the hell did this pass customs?"
Dude,
Because
me
it's
and Mrs.
heavy and
Vamp
it's sharp
still talk about
and it
that.
comes from Canada, so it had to go through American customs.
No, for sure, Devil. Like me and Mrs. Vamp still talk about that. Like seriously, like Fangs and Infernos, like this isn't plastic. This thing, it's in plastic. This thing is very, very metal and like very, and seriously, it is actually very sharp. Like for real. Like this
Yeah,
thing is insane.
it is.
So like, and that also just speaks to what, Devil was talking about, where it's like, no, Fangs and Infernos, like, go ahead and, you know, meet them. They are people that you want to meet. Devil and I had a really great experience recently with a musician that I was very fond of, that Devil was a bro about, and he was awesome, signed everything. In fact, he got very enthusiastic because apparently I brought something that like I said before when we got into the when we discussed the movie, like apparently I was the first person to bring it to him for him to sign, which I thought was insane considering how rabid his fan base is. But the fact of the matter is, Jen and Sylvia have always been incredibly loving of their fans and very gracious and very appreciative of everything that the fans have given them to allow them to give us so many great movies. So the funny thing about the Bone Saw is Devil gets the credit for that. Like he's the one who spotted it. Like we both followed the SOSKAs, but the situation hadn't really crossed my feed. And he's like, bro, they're doing bone saws for American Mary that they'll sign, and we should see if they'll sign it to the show. And Devil did the legwork, and then, I placed the order for us. And sure enough, that's just the way it worked out. And, you know, and in a pretty timely manner. I don't remember the overall time, but in a pretty timely manner, we had our, you know, two devil, two vampire, like, little bone saw from American Mary for us to enjoy. And it's super duper sick. We posted about getting it, and they definitely, I know that they had seen it. They are just genuinely great people, and we really, really encourage you guys to go out and meet them with whatever convention or appearance that they're doing, in your area. So I will say though, Devil, as a closing point for this and the Festival of Dead, considering George did so many of the Dead movies, I don't necessarily feel that the Soskas need to match George when it came to that. But Festival of the Dead is a really great time. And I'll tell you, my friend, I don't often root for a sequel, but I would not hate another of the Dead movie from them.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Like up to me, I'm like, I like to see a continuation and stuff like that. Maybe build on the characters. Maybe it's, a couple years later or something like that, and you see like the world, because of this festival, the world went to shit again, and it was even bigger than this zombie apocalypse was even bigger than the original one and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it'd be cool to see. You know what I mean? There's a couple things that I wouldn't mind seeing them do. I mean, I like to, see them do some original films, but there's some other ones I wouldn't mind seeing them putting their spin into and seeing how it is. But yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like, they're always gonna, be just the coolest people ever and stuff like that. And like I said, I mean, I was sad when elevator got taken down because I was like really really, like I said, I love the fact that was just a cool show and stuff like that. So maybe somewhere down the line, they can get another show or do something. I'm definitely down for that. But like I said, like that's the cool thing about them. And like I said, it's like not even just that. Like I said, they're into the comic book world. They're into this. I know they're just into like so much cool stuff. They're definitely big, huge. What some people might call geeks and stuff like that. But they're definitely into the fandoms that they're into, and they're just as much into that kind of stuff. I've even like I said, I've seen them at cons and like see them at cons meeting other actors or directors and stuff like that, and them getting just as giddy and having a shit-eating grin on their face, like, oh my god, I can't believe I just met this person or something like that. So it's great, that they, you can see them enjoying meeting fans, but also going out and meeting people who inspired them and stuff like that. And like I said, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you gotta, with the success of them doing films like, and we talked about this with the independent horror films now starting getting successful with people like Terrifier and those kind of guys kind of bringing back that stylish of movies. I wouldn't mind seeing the SOSKA system. That there's one we can throw out there. I'd like to see, that Mr. Terrifier is David is mainly been exclusive to the Terrifier world and stuff like that. But maybe they'll let the Soskas just borrow him for one movie because I'd like to see the Soskas a take with David doing something sinister and disgusting and bloody and see what he can do with them and stuff like that. Like I said, they don't need to take him for good. Just a
Yeah.
little that you can share the wealth. But I think it'd be cool to see them with that. But like I said, with them doing that kind of world, because like I said, I think at the time when they were making some of these independent films like the dead hooker in the trunk, I mean that was like them just doing the old school stuff, but doing the American Mary and the See No Evils, what I mean, they had to kind of walk a thin line because at that time independent horror films you know were fun for people like us to watch, but the
Yeah.
masses didn't really get into that. Where now people are starting. You have everybody, like I said, especially with the Terrifier ones. You know what I mean? Like I said, a lot of us were there with the Terrifier from the beginning, with all with the All Hallows or Eve or whatever the hell that's what it's called, All Hallows
No,
Eve. Yeah,
yeah, you got it.
that was like I think that's what it was. But All Hallows Eve, obviously, like we were huge when the first Terrifier came around, and then that second Terrifier came around, and that second Terrifier blew up and made a huge amount of money. And even then, like I said, with those guys, it was as big as that franchise got. It wasn't really until that third one where it was like, holy shit! Now everybody is an independent horror film, fan and stuff like that. So, but and I'm like I said, I'm not, you know what I mean. As much as it's one of those ones where it's like it's kind of like a love or hate relationship, and it like even like a band, like I really love this band, man. Not that people like, not that many people know them, and blah 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 blah. I want them to get big, and then they get really really big, and then you're like, fucking man, everybody knows who they are and stuff like that. But yeah, you're not a real fan. Like I always say that with Manson. I saw Manson back when he was like Spooky Kids. I saw him in his first tour in '94, seen all the old school stuff and stuff like that. So I was like, oh yeah, man, I love this guy. I hope he gets big now. Everybody's a huge Manson fan. I'm like, oh yeah, of course you're a Manson fan now because he's the coolest
Right.
thing to be in. So it's kind of like with that Terrifier. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I want someone like that. It's like I would never say
Yeah.
no, don't be successful in that kind of stuff with Terror. Even with the Soska sisters, I love to see them get to that multi-platinum stage, area where it's like boom, you're shitting out gold. You know what I mean? I love that. I love that because especially for when it comes to horror fans, it's nice to have that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, man, I really love horror films and stuff like that. Yeah, you're a newcomer, man. We've been loving this shit for years. We love the gore. We love the insane, crude, and disgusting things that Terrifier and Art the Clown was doing in his movies, and in Soska Sisters, chopping off arms and cutting up people and doing all that stuff. We've been into that stuff before it became cool with the masses, but. You know what I mean? I just, I'm looking forward to seeing, what the future, especially like I said, especially with these more independent, people where it's like, yeah, I mean, even like I said, even with Dead Hooker in the Trunk, you look at the amount of money they made that movie for. There's some
Yeah. Oh,
cool
yeah.
effects for that movie and stuff like that for as low budgeted. So it could, like I said, so it's cool. You don't have to have multi billions to make a good horror film. You can, as long as you have the right people around you and the people that can make things, you know, exactly how it's supposed to be with prosthetics and makeup and all that kind of stuff like that. You can make a low budget film look like $1 million. So it's cool. It's cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the sisters do. I'm looking forward to seeing horror independent films thriving.
Absolutely, my friend, for sure. Because, yeah, because you and I were incredibly spoiled when it came to David. I mean, we've met him like three, four, five times collectively or whatever, and now you can't get near that guy,
Yeah,
like without giving up
he's
your
the he's the Freddy
entire,
Krueger now. He's Robert Englund
yeah,
now.
without giving up your entire day at the con. Like you have to commit to the gig if you want an autograph for him. So again, we wish nothing but continued success for Jen and Sylvia, and we definitely hope that they continue to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. But hey, Jen and Sylvia, don't forget about us. We definitely need to score you guys for that interview. It's going to be a great time, and we definitely want to rock out with you guys. So, when we launch, we definitely want you guys to watch this. We'll make sure that you're tagged, which you will be seeing hopefully when you do watch this. But we are really, really looking forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you guys so much as well for everything that you guys have given myself and Devil, let alone all of your fans out there. And Fangs and Infernos, this is where we leave you. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this breakdown of the filmography of Jen and Sylvia, the Soska sisters, Twisted Twins Productions. Make sure you guys are supporting them on all of their socials, seeing everything that they've got coming up, going out, and hopefully, you'll go back and revisit some of these movies that maybe you shrugged off or just didn't realize were theirs. So definitely go and check it out. Coming up very, very soon, Devil and I will put out our respective top fives of the Soska sisters filmography, our top five movies that we really, really enjoy for them. I think it's safe to say that we'll definitely be enjoying some Festival of the Dead on there, and I'm sure some American Mary as well. But you're going to have to wait for the rest of it to see where we put these movies and how we like it. Thank you so much, Fangs and Infernos. We really appreciate you guys. But before we let you guys go, of course, remember that all of your Vampire and Devil merch is handled by Rock and Horror Apparel. Mark and Lizzie have been incredibly genuine to us. We love them to death. They're the best people we know. But make sure you guys are going to rockandhorror.com and go to the Vampire and Devil collab category for all of our merch, t-shirts, hats, tanks, hoodies, all that fun stuff. And remember that anytime Mark and Lizzie are running a discount, any kind of a deal, whether it be their Summerween, Halloween stuff, July 4th, so on and so forth. All of their discounts apply in our store as well. So take advantage of that. Buy some V&D stuff, buy some rock and horror stuff. You're going to love all of it. Also, make sure that you guys are supporting independent businesses like our buddy John at the Salem Witchboard Museum, as well as the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. And also, for anybody who likes twisted decor and fun things around the house, Twisted Vines is definitely a great place to check out. And of course, Devil and I are always on the con circuit, and we always love giving shout out to our buddy Chris at the Buffalo Bill House. We've stayed there. It's absolutely fantastic. We went with our respective misses as a big group, and we all had a great time. So definitely make sure that you guys are getting out there and rocking out and just taking advantage of all that fun stuff. And again, we're coming out of the cold season, getting into the hot season, but tea is just great for the world. Please, guys, make sure that you guys are supporting Brutalities. They've been great to us. We love them to death. Brutalities also just recently did a great blend featuring Cold Chamber that our beloved Devil was featured on and picked up by the Cold Chamber Instagram page. So that was super duper awesome that, they saw our post and were super duper down for the fact that we were talking about the teas. So shout out to Cold Chamber, shout out to Brutalities, and shout out to you guys. Fangs and Infernos, we love you guys to death. New episode coming up as always in the future. We got so much great stuff planned for you for season 3, but we are going to wrap it up for this episode of our director's episode featuring Twisted Twins Productions, the SOSKA sisters, Jen and Sylvia. Take care, be good, and we'll see you real soon. Horns up. Fangs out. Ghouls and Fangs. Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe. We've got John Waters. But what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And we love it. We love the fact that, they were gonna bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans or maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you gotta check it out, because the Devil and the Vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.